So we're going to kind of focus on foliage today. And the question is, what can your foliage do in the garden? Not what it does for the plant, because we know that. But in the garden, there's lots of things that foliage does. So it can add cohesion to your garden if it seems a bit chaotic. I tend to like the cottage garden look, but you can use foliage to add a little bit of cohesion to your garden, echoing either a color or a shape in your garden. This one is purple and blue. So you're looking at, ooh, let me we're going to do laser pointer today. So in this garden, now granted, this is not, none of these are my gardens. I'll let you know which my garden looks like. But you see the agapanthus purples, you've got some purples in here, but all the foliage, especially over here, looks a little blue tinged, and it kind of pops over here with a little bit of white reflected in the hosta colors over here in that foliage. So you can bring some colors together. So even some of your leaves will have an extra color to them. So the colors of the leaves can be great as a solid, but sometimes in the fall, they change colors. So you can add this is a hydrangea leaf that's starting to turn red for the fall, and it actually pairs very well with this autumn joy sedum. So you've got another reflection of the same color in your garden, and it doesn't go away very quickly. Flowers tend to last maybe a couple weeks for perennials, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks for an annual. So you want something that's going to kind of bring your colors together. Even when you don't have any flowers, you still can add some color and some interest. So that's so even in the fall, you can plan for that. Here's another option. If you look at these are magnolia leaves, and you can see the brown underneath these leaves kind of reflect in the brown bark of this very exfoliating bark, which looks awesome. But it also reflects and it leads your eye down the path to the foliage of this red Japanese maple. So even though you don't have a flower in there, oh, you do, you've got some of these pink ones, but your eye can lead you around for those down the path, and then you can have even some interesting brown color down here in these begonias, those bronze begonias. So it's not that we're trying to rely on flowers to make our gardens interesting. We're trying to add that interest in with some foliage. So the other thing is sometimes we get too repetitive, and sometimes it can get boring. So we don't want to have a boring garden, because we need some, we want to have a little bit of interest in there. So we want to avoid predictability. So if all of your plants are this yellowy lime green, that can be very predictable and kind of boring. So we want to add a little bit. So if you look over here, we've got this red, really red barberry. To tell you the truth, I don't think this is a real planting, because these plants are a little of the same. So I think that they're probably AI, or they're in a program where you can take photos of plants and put them in like in front of your picture of your house. They do have some repetition of this purple leaf plum, maybe, or Norway tree, or maybe it's a purple leafed crab apple. But I think they've got too many yellows in there. I would probably, the color's not, we've got some good color, but I think the shape of the leaves, it's all very fine textured. It looks like it's all little tiny leaves. I would like some big, maybe some oak leaf hydrangeas, something with a bigger shape of leaf. So not only does the foliage color make a difference, also the foliage shape or the size of the foliage. So we can get complementary colors. We need some texture. We didn't talk about texture or shapes yet. So this is a little bit of predictability. We have some little green blobs, well, yellow blobs. This next photo, we have a lot of little green meatballs, is what I like to call these. And these are probably boxwood. This one's definitely, somebody plunked some photos of pictures of photos of plants in this picture of this yard. And they put in the mulch the same way. It's not true mulch. But even though you're repeating these green meatballs every, of course, along the garden, it's this can be a little bit zazzier if we had maybe a yellow hosta or something of that sort that would kind of give you a little pop. This crepe myrtle looks pretty good, but to tell you the truth, it's kind of planted a little too close to the house. And putting plants in front of those windows, you're going to have to prune those a lot. So this might be your aesthetic, that it's very calming and pleasing, which is great. But you might need a little bit more pizzazz, maybe a little bit coarser texture of these plants than just all this fine texture that's on there. So textures, we've got color, we've got texture, and then we've got shape. So we've got different shapes, which is good. We've got a kind of an upright and a roundy moundy ball and another roundy moundy and a little topiary up here, but we don't have any vibrant colors or even more subtle colors. A little bit of white would have been okay to add with this. So color is one of the aspects of foliage that we're going to look at. Texture is another. So we talk about texture is a visual texture, not that we're, excuse me, feeling the plants, which we can. But if you look at this picture, I love this picture because it has all three different kinds of texture. It's got a fine texture where things kind of blend together as you get farther away. You've got a medium texture in this blue hosta here, so a medium-sized leaf, and then a very large leaf here in this yellow and of green plant here, this other hosta there. So that's what I would call a coarse texture. And if you want to look at it in kind of a line drawing situation, fine textures are usually indicative of, or kind of push things to the back. So if you're looking at a fine textured tree, it's going to be farther away visually than something that's a little bit more coarse textured. So that's going to jump to the front visually. So you not necessarily you have to put them in the front of the bed, but it's going to pull that bed closer to you. So we've got some fine textured uprights, and that could be anything. It could even be vines on a stake or on a trellis. Coarse textures in the front will kind of pull that bed closer to you, or at least those plants. Medium textures are kind of in the middle. And again, fine textures can be grasses. It can be ground covers. Usually our ground covers have very fine textures. And then you can do some coarse textures in the back there too. So we also like to have a focal point, and sometimes that can be a plant or it can be an object. And that object also has texture. So I would say that this planter, this very tall planter, is a good focal point in this garden, but it kind of matches the color of the bark of this weeping tree here. So you can kind of get a mimic or a complement in your garden by adding some other objects, not necessarily plants. So what you're looking for is not having too many focal points or commanding elements in your garden, because that can look chaotic because your mind doesn't know where to go. But if you have one, and as you maybe turn around the corner of a path, you've got another one, that is a good way to lead people through your garden. Do I have those in my garden? Not usually. I try to. It takes a long time to get there. So here's another focal point just in a garden, and this one's used color. So they've used this really bright yellow spirea, and they've mimicked that with this foliage here I'm not even sure what kind of plant that is, a grassy type plant. And then the spirea blooms pink, and they've echoed that pink with these daisies here in the back. So, and then the other thing is they've also tied that in with this foliage color, kind of a blue foliage, in with this bluish foliage back here with that looks like a butterfly weed, maybe, or that's what we're going to call it, and maybe a dianthus or something back here in the back. So even, something that's a bright color that has a showy bloom can be your focal point for the moment, and foliage will continue for that to be a focal point. If you're using flowers as focal points, they tend to bounce around the garden because they're not there all the time for that. So yeah, look for a focal point. And then you have your supporting cast. So there are other textures, foliage textures, that can help shine the spotlight or kind of move to the background of of the garden and let something else shine through. So I love this cypress, Leland cypress, or it could be arborvitae, really kind of makes a nice backdrop to make this blue hosta really, really shine. And when that hosta blooms for the 2 weeks it's going to bloom, those white flowers are really going to pop off that back of that green background. And that foil of green or background of green really pops off this light yellow green or chartreuse hosta. So you're getting that as a background, and it that supports the cast of the more shiny, brighter plants that you have in the garden. And the thing is, this all changes all the time. And then you can use fine textures, mostly grasses, or as what I call a binder, or something that's going to bind all of your plants together. It may be a ground cover that kind of flows through the garden that gives it the cohesiveness that you're looking for. So you're looking for these fine textured grasses. Dianthus works really well in a sunny border. There's all sorts of things you can use. In a shady garden, you might be looking for your mulch could definitely be a binder. It's not foliage, but you could use some of those tiny creeping plants to bind that all together. Ajuga is one that we use a lot for a binder, and that one comes in all sorts of different colors. It gives you a good flow through your garden. So that's kind of the texture part. And then we have shape. We have foliage shape. It usually refers to the outline of a leaf, but it can also be the outline of the plant. So your outline of your leaf may be heart-shaped, or it might be an elongated teardrop. It could be round. It could be deeply lobed. But the leaf shape is also a force to contend with because you can repeat that throughout your garden. So we're talking about repetition a lot. So we're doing subtle shape echoing. So we're shaping, so the shape of the leaf in this grass echoes the shape in this allium or this onion, flowering onion, which also echoes over here, maybe in a different color or different size here at the edge of this garden. The spikiness of the alliums are also echoed over here in this little sage that's over here. The whiteness of the hydrangeas is echoed back over here in the flowers. So, and this fine boxwood texture, I think echoes really well against the grasses. And they put a whole border hedge of something, who knows what it is, around the edge. So you're echoing the outside of the garden back into the center. They've also done that with the color of if the redbud and the alliums all bloom at the same time, that also echoes that color again. So you're looking at shape and of your flower, of your foliage to echo across, and that also brings some cohesion. You're also looking at too much repetition can be sleepy or boring. So there's other contrast that you're looking for. So even though we're echoing the grass shapes over here and on the other side point, they're different colors. They're different scales. These are very fine foliages. The allium flowers can be, or not flowers, foliage can be very thick. So you're echoing, but it's not a true echo. It's a little bit different. So think about similar but different. I know that sounds kind of oxymoronic, but that's what happens. And then we have variegated foliage, which is so fun to work with. But if you have too much variegation, it can become very busy. So remember, we do need those solid colors in the gardens too, or you're going to just overwhelm everybody. So even though we have the lime greens and the whites and the blues and just the regular greens, the whites and the yellows, sometimes too much variegation can cause it to be busy. but it does a really great job if you've got a lot of shrubs or a lot of green. You can break it up and bring some light into your garden. This is a very heavily shaded garden, so hence all the hostas, but they've added just a couple. This one right here is green and white to bring some dappled light to the bottom of the forest floor. They've kind of got a little bit of yellow tips over here in this garden. Oh, and this part of the garden to give you just a little bit of an echo of that light coming back through, but you can break up what they call the sea of green. I had that in my garden a lot, and I decided I was going to add some variegated hostas, and I think I have some variegated lily of the valley that are doing pretty well in there. You can also warm up a shady garden. If it's mostly these dark blue greens, dark greens, you can add some yellows or some whites. The warmer colors tend to come closer to you in this garden. So they added a lot more of the yellow variegation as opposed to the white. They also did something really cool here. They have, this is an alum root or heuchera, which has kind of a pink cast to it. And they echoed that with the hydrangeas in a pot on the steps. So even those warm colors will tend to warm up those shady gardens. So warming would be the yellow variegation. If you want the cooling effect, go with a white variegation on your plants. You can combine variegated plants. It can be kind of a headache if you're not careful. But you can mix several together in a small area with a little know-how. So the key to successfully combining variegated plants is to remember the importance of contrast, both in size, shape, and texture. And sometimes leaves have their own visual texture. Now that we talked about this, the size being a texture, but they can be crinkly like this. That kind of echoes in the crinkly visual texture of this forget-me-not. And those look pretty good together. They're different shapes, they're different sizes. They do a pretty good job. And then I would probably add something a little bit more solid next to that to give my eye a rest. So when you're looking at your variegated plants, you can definitely add a little bit back in there if you find that your plants are a little busy. I take a lot of pictures, so I can look back at my pictures, step away, and see if I've got a little bit of a visual headache going on with too many variegated plants. So here's a case study. Somebody's side garden in their yard. And you look, they've got some pretty, there's a lot of fine texture here, but you've got a focal point on this side with this big, bold, that looks like a rattlesnake master plant. Looks really bold. I would have probably echoed that a little bit over here because this kind of gets a little muddy. You can see that that's kind of muddy, but they've echoed the pink from this yarrow into the pink over here. We've got a lot of grasses in there that gives you that fine base texture. And then they've got yellows in some of the foliage over here and over here. Wait, there it is. So you're looking at things kind of bouncing around over there in the garden. I think they could add a couple plants and be probably with some bolder foliage to kind of spruce that one up a little bit. Here's a typical front yard, very monochromatic, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But you're looking at this liriope. It's not variegated, which is fine. You could have used variegated liriope to kind of echo the whiteness of the concrete, but it echoes the grass as a texture. So you've got a different size and shape of leaf. They have a lot of boxwood. It's a lot of boxwood to trim. I would have probably put in maybe a bigger leafed plant, maybe hydrangea. I love hydrangeas, especially oak leaf. They look a little coarse. They can look a little messy too. But I would have put those over here. They may not get enough sun, but they do have a little bit of height. And then they do have a little bit of color to kind of announce where the front door is. One other thing I may have done is taken an extra pot and put it right here in the corner So as people come around, they see this planter pot, and then they turn and they follow the sidewalk, and then they know where the entrance is to the front door. You could have put it here. You could have put it right here if you wanted to, so people know where the front door is. It's leading the eye, it's leading the person through the garden. But this one needs just a little bit more work. But you know what? Gardeners are always working on their gardens. All right. Here's another one. I'm not so much for the boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, down the row. But if that's all you got, that's all you got. They do have some nice coarse foliage in this. These are common milkweeds back here in the back. And I probably would have put a little bit more oomph back there, but and I probably would have planted this tree a little farther out. But you look, they've got different colored flowers. You could have done this with foliage. You could have added that coarseness back here with a different plant. This one for me is kind of ho-hum. Not sure what else I would add to that. Here's another front door. I love front doors because everybody sees that out there. I think they've done a pretty good job with this one. They've got some pinks over here but it's kind of fine foliage. Here's another little dianthus plant or something that's small. They've got a lot of fine foliage. They do have a lot of different colors they didn't echo any of like the blue spruce. They could have put the blue spruce back over here in the corner, or had a different shaped, like a triangular shaped blue spruce over here, to help out. Looks pretty fine. This one's a lot of red. They did use a lot of red foliage in the begonias, in the not sure, in the alliums, which echoes over here in the Japanese maples. They've got a couple of those. I think they did a pretty good job. It's busy because they kind of alternated the green and the bronze begonias here. But you know what? It leads your eye around. Your eyes are bouncing. They do have a good contrast with this big giant hosta leaf and the smaller heucheras, and the hosta leaves. Look at that. The heart shape of this leaf is echoed over here. It's like could be a scarlet runner bean or something of that sort coming over here. They've got some good bones in the evergreens. They've got grasses. This one's a pretty coarse looking grass plant with this fine one in the back. So yeah, they have done a pretty good job here. Echoing, boink, boink. The hostas are bouncing around. And they've got extra containers. So that's another way to kind of continue their color and scheme. This one's got a lot of color in it, but they've kind of contained it with the neutral base. I think they need a little bit more different, a little different shape maybe. They've got one silver little plant here. They probably could have echoed that a little bit in the beds, although this lantana will take over. And again, I think this one is a, here, let's cut out some pictures and put them on a landscape. But they've done a pretty good job. They've echoed these little, I'm going to call those boxwoods, but they've added a little bit of yellow to kind of foil on the daylilies. These little pink spikies. So they've got different foliage textures. And they've continued that up the front door. Across the front of the house. And so they've done a good job of repetition, especially with their tree shapes. But they just need, I think, a little bit bolder foliage maybe. And not as much of this fine textured foliage. But you know what? I will say this to everybody. This is your garden. You do what you want. But just remember to add, think about the foliage texture and color and shape as you're adding that to your garden. So there's a couple of places that I would send you to. So there's Designing Foliage Over Flowers from gardendesign.com. This Basic Principles of Landscape Design is a really good way to add design to your garden instead of like I do, just I buy plants and find a place to put them, which is not what you're supposed to do. This one is a landscape design HO 105, which I believe is one of our Master Gardener chapters, but it's a really good way to kind of plan out your designs also. But remember to kind of take foliage into your consideration when you're designing a landscape, because it stays around a lot longer than the flowers do.